at a red light. I looked over and saw my fiancée in the back seat of a car making out with some guy. She said she was with her mom. When the guy noticed me staring, the day did not feel important when it started. It felt ordinary in a way that almost annoyed me. Work dragged longer than it should have, and I left earlier than planned only because a meeting collapsed at the last minute. I remember thinking that I would surprise Sharon by showing up at home before she expected me. She had texted earlier that she was spending the evening with her mother, and the apartment would be quiet. I imagined an empty place, a shower, maybe an early night. Nothing in my head suggested that the next 10 minutes would fracture everything I thought I understood about my life. Traffic slowed near the intersection 2 blocks from the freeway entrance. The light turned red, and I stopped behind a delivery van. Out of habit, I looked around. To my right, a dark sedan rolled to a stop. I noticed it only because the back seat window was down slightly, and movement caught my eye. At first, my brain refused to assemble the picture. It registered hair, then a familiar curve of a cheek, then a hand resting where it should not have been. Sharon was in the back seat. She was angled toward a man sitting beside her, her body relaxed in a way that comes from repetition, not from surprise. His hand rested at her waist. Her fingers were threaded through his hair. They were close enough that there was no space left to misunderstand what I was seeing. This was not an accidental moment. This was not a greeting. This was not confusion. Tom did something strange. Everything slowed but did not blur. I noticed details I had no reason to notice. The crease in the leather seat. The faint scratch on the car door. The way Sharon's bracelet caught the light when she moved her wrist. I had bought that bracelet for her 2 months earlier. She had worn it tonight. My first instinct was denial, but it did not last long enough to be comforting. My second instinct was anger, but it arrived muted, like a sound heard through a wall. Mostly, I felt alert, focused, as if something inside me had decided that panic would be useless and clarity was necessary. The man turned his head slightly and saw me. He did not pull away. He did not freeze. He looked directly at me and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a confused one. It was the kind of expression people wear when they believe they are winning something. He said something to the driver, who I could not see clearly, and the car crept forward a few inches even though the light was still red. Sharon followed his gaze then. Her eyes met mine. Her face changed, but not the way guilt changes a face. There was surprise, yes, but layered beneath it was calculation. The kind of expression someone wears when a plan breaks early, but not completely. She pulled back from him slowly, not in panic, not in shame, but in irritation, as if I had interrupted something she intended to finish. The light turned green. The sedan accelerated smoothly and merged into traffic ahead of me. I followed without thinking about it, keeping a safe distance, not trying to hide what I was doing. I wanted to know where they were going, but more than that, I wanted to see if this was familiar territory for them. It was. The car turned confidently into a residential area I recognized. Not her mother's neighborhood. Not anywhere near it. I called her. She answered after 3 rings. Her voice sounded calm, slightly distracted. She said she was just arriving at her mother's place and asked what was wrong. There was no hesitation in the lie. No crack. No delay. I told her I had just seen her. She laughed softly and said I must have been mistaken, that traffic can play tricks on people, that she was tired of my imagination running ahead of reality. She said all of this while I was still behind the car she was sitting in. I told her I was coming home and that she should be there when I arrived. She paused then, just long enough to register as a mistake. She asked why that was necessary. I ended the call without answering. I did not follow the car any farther. I turned around and drove home. My hands were steady on the wheel, which surprised me. I kept waiting for something dramatic to happen inside me, some physical reaction that would justify how serious this felt. It never came. Instead, there was a quiet, determined calm, the kind that feels dangerous only in hindsight. When I reached the apartment, the lights were off. I sat in the car for a minute, not to compose myself, but to decide what I would and would not accept. I realized something important then. Whatever explanation Sharon offered later would be built on the assumption that I doubted my own eyes. I decided I would not. She arrived 20 minutes later. She walked in like someone returning from an errand, not like someone stepping into a confrontation. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and looked at me with an expression that suggested mild annoyance. She asked why I had cut the call. I told her what I had seen, in plain terms, without emotion. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I described. She denied it. She said she had been with her mother. She said I was tired. She said stress was making me paranoid. She said the city was full of people who looked alike. She said all of this smoothly, one sentence feeding the next. I watched her closely, not for tears or shaking, but for inconsistency. There was none. That was when I understood this lie was not being invented now. It was being deployed. I told her about the car, the street, The timing. She adjusted her story without panic. She said her mother lived closer than I thought. She said she had met a friend briefly on the way. She said it was innocent. She said I was overreacting. She said trust mattered in a relationship. I asked her one question. I asked why the man had smiled at me. That question stopped her. She did not answer immediately. She sighed and sat down, as if exhausted by my stubbornness. She said I must have imagined that too. She said people smile for many reasons. She said I was fixating on something small to avoid a bigger conversation about insecurity. I told her I would be calling her mother. That was the first real crack. She stood up quickly and said that was unnecessary. She said it would embarrass her mother. She said families should not be dragged into private matters. She said we could talk this through like adults. The words came faster now, less controlled. Still no confession. Still no apology. I made the call. Her mother answered and confirmed that Saren had been with her earlier. She added details Saren could not have invented on the spot. What they had eaten, what they had talked about, how long she stayed. The lie was shared, coordinated, practiced. I ended the call and looked at Saren. She did not look relieved. She looked irritated, as if something had gone slightly off schedule. That was the moment the engagement ended, even though neither of us said it out loud yet. Not because of the kiss I had seen, but because of the system behind it. The planning, the coverage, the confidence that I would either accept the story or be painted as unreasonable if I did not. I told her to pack a bag and leave for the night. I did not ask. I did not threaten. I stated it as a temporary boundary. She laughed once, sharply, and said I could not just throw her out. I reminded her that the apartment was in my name and that temporary meant temporary. She stared at me for a long moment, weighing options, then went to the bedroom. As she packed, I sat in the living room and replayed the man's smile in my head. It was not the smile of someone hiding. It was the smile of someone who believed he was protected. I realized then that this was not about a single mistake. This was about something already in motion, something that assumed I would play my role without deviation. When she left, she did not cry. She did not apologize. She said we would talk tomorrow and closed the door carefully behind her. I stood there alone, not feeling victorious or devastated, but aware that whatever came next would not be simple, and that nothing I did from this point forward could be undone. The apartment felt larger after Saren left, not emptier, just exposed. The quiet was not peaceful. It carried weight, as if the walls were waiting to hear what I would do next. I did not sleep. I sat on the couch until morning, replaying the evening not to torture myself, but to map it. Every word she had chosen. Every pause she had not expected. The way her mother's confirmation had arrived too easily. By dawn, one thing was clear. This situation was not fragile. It was reinforced. Saren texted just after 8. She wrote as if nothing had broken yet. She suggested coffee. She said we should talk calmly and not let emotions distort things. I did not respond. Instead, I called her brother, Tauren. We were not close, but we had always been direct with each other. I told him I needed to see him and that it concerned his sister. He agreed without questions, which told me more than his words did. We met near his workplace. I did not dramatize anything. I described what I had seen and what I had heard afterward. I watched his face as I spoke. He did not interrupt. He did not defend her. He did not look surprised. When I finished, he asked one question, quiet and precise. He asked how long I thought it had been happening. That was the first confirmation that mattered. Tauren admitted that Saren had mentioned someone else months earlier, framed as a harmless connection that meant nothing. He said she had told him it was complicated, but under control. He said she had insisted there was no risk to the engagement. He had believed her because she sounded certain. People trust certainty more than truth. While we talked, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Saren was calling. I let it ring. Tauren suggested we confront her together. I agreed, but not immediately. I wanted one more piece in place first. I drove to her mother's house. I did not announce myself. I knocked, waited, and when she opened the door, I asked to come in. She looked guarded but allowed it. I told her calmly that I knew Saren had not been with her the night before. I told her I was not there to argue, but to understand why she had lied for her daughter. She did not deny it. She said families protect each other. She said relationships were complex. She said Saren loved me, and that mistakes happened. She spoke as if this were a negotiation, not an exposure. When I asked her if she knew the man Saren was seeing, she hesitated. Then she said yes. She said he was temporary. She said Saren needed to feel desired before marriage. She said it was better than Saren resenting me later. That conversation rewrote everything. I left without raising my voice. In the car, I realized something else. This was not betrayal happening behind closed doors. This was betrayal being justified in advance. Rationalized. Approved. The engagement was not sacred to them. It was convenient. When I returned home, Saren was waiting outside the building. She stepped toward me as I parked, already speaking, already shaping the story she wanted me to hear. She said she had been scared. She said the man meant nothing. She said she felt trapped by expectations. She said the wedding pressure had distorted her judgment. The words sounded practiced, but now I could hear the structure behind them. Tauren arrived midway through her explanation. She froze when she saw him. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He asked her directly whether she had been planning to continue seeing the other man after the wedding. She did not answer him. She looked at me instead. That was answer enough. Tauren told her she had crossed a line she could not step back over. He told her the family would not clean this up for her. He told her she needed to choose whether to be honest now or be exposed later. She laughed then, sharp and defensive, and said honesty was subjective. She said people survived worse things. She said she had managed everything so far. That was when the other man appeared. He parked across the street and walked over as if he belonged there. He greeted Saren without hesitation, without embarrassment. He nodded at Tauren, then looked at me with the same calm confidence he had shown at the red light. He said we should all talk. He said misunderstandings happened when people refused to adapt. His name was Kate. He said he and Saren had been together for almost a year. He said he knew about the engagement and had been promised that it was a formality. He said Saren had told him the marriage would secure stability and that she would leave me once things were settled. Saren interrupted him then, accusing him of exaggeration, accusing him of betrayal. Kate pulled out his phone and showed Tauren messages. Not selected, not cropped. Long threads that mapped intention clearly. The lie collapsed in real time. Neighbors watched from balconies. No one shouted. No one cried. Saren tried to redirect the conversation toward privacy, toward fairness, toward my supposed rigidity. Kate stepped back when he realized the advantage he thought he had was dissolving. Tauren told Saren to stop speaking. She did not. I told her to leave the building. This time, there was no laughter. She demanded time. She demanded understanding. She demanded that I remember everything we had built. I told her to take what she had already packed and go. Kate offered to take her. She hesitated, calculating optics, then accepted. That night, I changed the locks. By morning, the story had spread through the family. Saren tried to control it, but control requires allies, and hers were withdrawing. Messages arrived from relatives asking careful questions. I answered factually. I sent nothing dramatic. I let the weight of consistency do the work. The engagement was not publicly canceled yet, but it was functionally over. Vendors were paused. Accounts were frozen. I documented everything without obsession, not for revenge, but for protection. Saren sent messages swinging between apology and accusation. I did not respond. The most unsettling part was how quickly her tone shifted when she realized leverage was gone. She began implying consequences. She hinted that people might misunderstand my behavior. She suggested that prolonged conflict could damage reputations. She framed cooperation as mercy. That was when I understood the next phase was coming. This was no longer about discovery. It was about containment. And Saren had never lost control of a situation like this before. The red light had been the beginning. This was the point where momentum changed direction, and everyone involved felt it. The shift was subtle at first. Saren stopped trying to explain herself and started trying to manage outcomes. Her messages changed tone overnight. The language of reconciliation disappeared and was replaced by suggestion, implication, and pressure wrapped in politeness. She no longer asked how I was feeling. She asked what I planned to do next. That question mattered more to her than the damage already done. I kept my responses minimal and factual when responses were necessary at all. Silence unsettles people who are used to steering conversations. Saren had always been effective because she could frame any situation as a misunderstanding and then guide people toward the version that benefited her. That approach failed when there was no one willing to participate. The first attempt at leverage came through mutual acquaintances. I started receiving carefully worded messages asking if everything was truly as bad as it seemed. The questions followed the same pattern, suggesting concern for my well-being while probing for doubt. I answered with consistency. I described what I had seen, what had been admitted, and what had been shown. I avoided interpretation. Facts traveled faster than emotion. Saren escalated. She contacted my employer under the guise of concern. She suggested that the stress of wedding planning had affected my stability and that recent behavior might worry people who relied on me. The attempt was clumsy, but it revealed intent. I documented the contact and notified my supervisor preemptively. Transparency worked where insinuation did not. Her credibility weakened further. Roswin reached out next, not with apologies, but with negotiation. She proposed a private resolution, something discreet that would spare embarrassment. She emphasized the long-term consequences of public fallout. She framed silence as maturity. I told her there would be no performance of normalcy to protect a lie that had been planned. The conversation ended without agreement. Meanwhile, Kate's position began to deteriorate. He contacted me directly, not to threaten, but to recalibrate. He admitted he had believed Saren's version of events because it benefited him. He admitted he had expected access to finances and status after the wedding. He admitted that he had underestimated how quickly things would unravel once evidence surfaced. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for distance. I agreed to one meeting, not to reconcile, but to understand the scope of what Saren had attempted. Kate brought records, messages, notes, calendar entries, not as a weapon, but as proof of his own miscalculation. He had thought he was a partner. He realized he had been a contingency. That realization turned him from asset to liability for Saren. She reacted by cutting him off completely, accusing him of betrayal and exaggeration. She warned him against sharing anything further. The threat carried no authority now. Kate forwarded the warning to Tauren, who forwarded it to Roswin. The family dynamic fractured in ways that could not be repaired quietly. The next pressure point came from Saren herself, delivered carefully and indirectly. She implied that prolonged conflict could produce misunderstandings about consent, temperament, and intent. She did not accuse. She suggested. The implication was clear enough to document. I forwarded the message to my attorney and stopped all direct communication. That decision accelerated everything. Tauren informed me that Saren had been calling relatives, reframing the story to portray herself as overwhelmed and me as inflexible. He also told me the family was no longer unified. Some believed her, others did not. The difference mattered less than the fact that the narrative was no longer controlled by one voice. I moved forward with formal steps. I withdrew from shared vendor agreements. I froze joint expenditures. I notified the venue that the engagement was under dispute and that no further payments were authorized. Each action removed another illusion of inevitability. Saren responded with urgency, demanding conversation, demanding compromise, demanding time. None of those demands came with accountability. The confrontation she had avoided arrived anyway. A family meeting took place at Roswin's house, not by my request, but by Tauren's insistence. He wanted everything placed in one room where it could no longer be edited. I attended without expectation. Saren arrived late and attempted to steer the tone immediately, appealing to emotion and fatigue. Tauren stopped her before she gained momentum. Kate's documentation was presented without commentary. Dates, plans, assumptions. The future Saren had described to each party contradicted the others in ways that could not be reconciled. She attempted to minimize, then to contextualize, then to discredit. None of it held. Roswin said nothing for most of the meeting. When she finally spoke, it was not in defense. It was in disappointment. She acknowledged that she had enabled something she should have confronted. She acknowledged that silence had become complicity. That admission mattered because it shifted responsibility away from misunderstanding and toward choice. Saren did not apologize. She argued strategy. She questioned relevance. She framed exposure as cruelty. She insisted that intentions mattered more than outcomes. The room disagreed without raising voices. The disagreement was quiet and final. After the meeting, Saren attempted one last maneuver. She contacted mutual friends with a revised version of events that painted the family meeting as an ambush. That attempt collapsed quickly when Tauren shared the same documentation she had hoped to bury. The speed at which her support eroded surprised even her. I relocated temporarily during this period, not to escape, but to ensure distance. The move was practical. It reduced opportunities for confrontation and prevented spontaneous encounters from becoming scenes. Saren interpreted the move as retreat and sent a message suggesting she was willing to forgive my absence if we could reset privately. That message clarified everything. She still believed control was possible if the environment could be adjusted. She had not grasped that the outcome was no longer negotiable. The engagement had not ended because of exposure alone. It had ended because the structure beneath it had collapsed. Legal notices followed shortly after. Formal, impersonal, necessary. Saren responded through representation with a demand for mediation. I declined. Mediation implies shared misunderstanding. There was none. The consequences began accumulating outside my involvement. Saren's professional relationships cooled as questions circulated. Not accusations, but patterns. Kate withdrew completely from her orbit and left the city within the month. Roswin retreated socially, limiting contact while recalibrating her standing among relatives who now viewed her judgment differently. By the end of the third week, Saren had exhausted leverage. There were no threats left to imply, no narratives left to reshape, no allies left who believed secrecy equaled protection. The situation had moved beyond conflict and into consequence. Everything that followed would be irreversible, not because of vengeance, but because trust does not survive strategic dishonesty. The red light had revealed the betrayal. This phase revealed the intent behind it. What remained was resolution, and resolution would not arrive quietly. By the time the fourth week began, nothing felt dramatic anymore. The chaos had burned through its oxygen and left behind something quieter and heavier. This was not the silence of forgiveness or relief. It was the silence that follows decisions once they stop being debated. Every move after that point carried weight because it could not be reframed later. The formal cancellation of the engagement happened without a meeting. I sent a single written notice through my attorney. It was factual, procedural, and unemotional. Dates were listed. Shared obligations were outlined. Responsibilities were divided cleanly. There was no commentary on betrayal or morality. The document did what Saren had always feared. It treated the relationship as a concluded transaction rather than an emotional bond still open to interpretation. Saren reacted within hours. Her response came through representation first, then through multiple indirect channels when that failed to produce urgency. She attempted to reopen discussion by arguing proportionality, suggesting that mistakes should not destroy futures. The argument ignored the fact that the future she described had never been shared. It had been managed. When mediation was rejected again, her tone hardened. The appeals to empathy disappeared and were replaced by claims of unfair treatment. None of it altered the process. Vendors acknowledged the cancellation without drama. Some asked questions. None required explanation beyond the formal notice. Deposits were forfeited according to contract terms. That loss landed entirely with Saren, as agreed upon earlier in writing during the engagement. There was no dispute worth pursuing. The clarity of documentation left little room for argument. The venue released the date within days. That detail mattered more than it should have. Saren had believed the wedding date anchored everything. Once it was gone, the illusion of inevitability collapsed completely. People stopped asking when things would be resolved and started asking what had happened. Not with curiosity, but with caution. The social consequences followed predictable patterns. Friends who had been closest to Saren withdrew first, not because they believed me unconditionally, but because proximity to instability carries risk. Others attempted neutrality, which lasted until consistency forced alignment. No one wanted to be caught defending a version of events that kept changing. Silence became distance. Distance became absence. Saren moved back into her mother's house. That return was not framed as retreat publicly. It was described as a temporary regrouping. In private, it was clear the arrangement was strained. Roswin no longer shielded her from questions. The enabling had ended, replaced by a guarded support that came with conditions. Saren resented that shift more than the breakup itself. Control had been replaced with supervision. Professionally, the fallout arrived quietly. There was no scandal, no announcement, just hesitation. Opportunities that had once been assumed became uncertain. Recommendations softened. People who had trusted Saren's consistency began asking for confirmation where they had not before. Reputation does not collapse in a single moment. It erodes through repetition of doubt. Saren attempted to rebuild narrative one final time. She posted vague messages about resilience and renewal. She spoke about growth without specifics. The response was muted. Not hostile, just absent. Engagement requires belief, and belief had already been spent. She removed the posts within a week. Cade never resurfaced. He relocated and cut contact completely. That disappearance was not dramatic. It was practical. He had understood earlier than Saren that association carried liability. Whatever version of himself he attempted to preserve required distance from the entire situation. Tauren remained in contact with me. Our conversations were infrequent but direct. He did not ask for reconciliation between me and his sister. He acknowledged the damage without minimizing it. He told me Saren struggled with the idea that consequences could not be negotiated away. He said she still framed the outcome as excessive. That detail mattered only because it confirmed something essential. There had been no internal shift, only external pressure. The final administrative steps took place without incident. Accounts were closed. Shared services were transferred. The apartment was fully disentangled from her name. Each task felt smaller than the last, but together they formed a line that could not be crossed again. Closure did not arrive as relief. It arrived as stability. Saren attempted contact once more, directly this time. The message was brief and controlled. She said she understood now that things had gone too far. She said she wished circumstances had been different. She said she hoped I could remember the good parts. There was no apology in the message. No acknowledgement of strategy or intent. Just a request to soften memory. I did not respond. That choice was not punishment. It was alignment. Engaging would have reopened a dynamic built on interpretation rather than reality. The silence allowed the outcome to remain what it was. Final. The consequences extended beyond the immediate circle. Family gatherings adjusted without announcement. Invitations changed. Seating arrangements shifted. Saren's absence became normalized in spaces where she had once assumed permanence. No one discussed it openly. The quiet carried its own explanation. I relocated permanently within the month. The move was not dramatic. It was logistical. A different routine. A different neighborhood. A deliberate reduction in shared reference points. Life reorganized itself without needing justification. The future did not need to be rebuilt. It simply continued without interference. The red light became an anecdote I never told. People assumed there had been a moment of discovery, some emotional climax. There had not been. There had been recognition, followed by a sequence of choices that removed ambiguity. The damage did not come from what I saw in that car. It came from everything that had been planned around my blindness. Saren lost more than an engagement. She lost the ability to control outcomes through narrative alone. She lost the protection of inevitability. She lost the belief that consequences could be delayed indefinitely. None of that was inflicted deliberately. It emerged naturally once structure collapsed. I did not gain anything from the ending. There was no sense of triumph. No vindication. What remained was clarity. The kind that prevents repetition. The kind that does not require constant reinforcement. Some stories end with confrontation or forgiveness. This one ended with separation and permanence. The difference mattered. Nothing was repaired. Nothing was reclaimed. The future simply adjusted to the truth that had been avoided. That was the consequence.